thieves that never break your locks, that never climb your walls or reach for your wallet. They do not come in the night with violence, but in the day with invitation. They speak not in curses, but in comforts. Their weapons are not blades, but pleasures that promise peace while emptying your soul. The enemy does not need to frighten you to destroy you. He only needs to entertain you. He need not drag you into hell. He only needs to keep you content on the road that leads there. It begins with something small, a habit too common to suspect, a comfort too convenient to question. The human heart, once aflame with purpose, begins to cool, not because it rejects the good, but because it replaces it with the easy. The devil's genius has never been rebellion. It has always been substitution. He whispers, "Why suffer for meaning when you can feel alive for a moment?" And so the trade begins, eternity exchanged for the thrill of now. The first theft is time, time, that invisible currency of destiny, that sacred rhythm by which the soul grows into its purpose. The enemy steals it not by force, but by fragments. A minute here, a scroll there, a night lost in numbness. You don't feel it leave. It trickles through your fingers like sand, and yet each grain carries what might have been a book unwritten, a prayer unsaid, a dream unfollowed. When you live for pleasure, you begin to treat time as entertainment instead of investment. And slowly, your life becomes a museum of almost full of distractions, devoid of depth. The second theft is focus. Pleasure teaches the mind to scatter. It trains the heart to chase, but never to dwell. You find yourself unable to sit in silence, to think a thought to its end, to pray without impatience. You have forgotten how to be still, because stillness exposes the hunger you keep feeding with noise. The enemy rejoices in this, for as long as your attention is fractured, your spirit cannot form anything whole. He does not need to stop your prayers, only to fill your room with enough noise that you forget to begin. The third theft is conviction. Once you could feel the difference between right and wrong burning like fire in your chest. Now it's all gray, all negotiable. You tell yourself you are being open-minded, mature, non-judgmental, but in truth you have begun to drift. Pleasure dulls the conscience. It whispers, if it feels good, it can't be that bad. And with every compromise, a piece of clarity dies. The enemy does not steal conviction in one blow. He erodes it through rationalization. Soon you no longer call sin by its name, you rename it to make it easier to swallow. And then comes the fourth theft, peace. You begin to sense it late at night when the noise fades. The room is quiet, but your heart is restless. You chase the next distraction, the next indulgence, but it never silences the echo of what you've lost. Peace is not the absence of pain. It is the presence of order. It cannot live in a divided heart. The enemy's masterpiece is to make you believe that comfort will cure your anxiety, when in truth, comfort is the cage that keeps you anxious. Peace cannot coexist with guilt disguised as pleasure. Finally, the fifth and cruelest theft, identity. The enemy's ultimate goal is not to make you immoral, but to make you forget who you are. Once you knew yourself as something sacred, a bearer of light, a vessel of divine intention, but the more you feed the body at the expense of the soul, the more you begin to live as an appetite rather than an image. You were meant to command desire, but now desire commands you. And when that reversal happens, the crown slips from your spirit. You become a servant to the very things you were created to rule. It is a strange irony of the human heart. The more it indulges, the emptier it feels. Pleasure promises satisfaction, but produces craving. It gives you a taste of heaven to keep you enslaved to earth. You think you are choosing freedom, but you are merely choosing a different master. The enemy's theft is not visible. He steals from the inside out. He takes the invisible wealth, your will, your wonder, your worship. And when he has finished, you will have everything you ever wanted and nothing you truly need. But even in the midst of loss, a faint light remains. For though the enemy may steal, he cannot create. He can twist, but he cannot originate. And that means every theft can be reversed, every wound rewritten into wisdom. The path back begins not with shame, but with awareness, the quiet moment when you finally see that what you called pleasure was really hunger in disguise. The moment you name your hunger for what it truly is, a hunger for meaning, for truth, for God, the spell begins to break. You begin to remember that joy and pleasure are not the same thing. Pleasure feeds the moment. Joy feeds the soul. Pleasure fades when it is satisfied. Joy multiplies when it is shared. Pleasure consumes. Joy creates. The devil deals in moments. God deals in meaning. And when you finally turn from the former to the latter, the enemy's theft is exposed. You realize he never stole your light. He only convinced you to hide it. And so the restoration begins, not with thunder, but with truth. The awakening begins quietly, almost shyly. It is not an angel's trumpet, but a sigh, a moment when the soul, tired of running, simply admits, this isn't working anymore. That is the turning point. Heaven does not rush in with applause. It waits for that whisper. For the divine does not intrude, it invites. The door to redemption has never been locked. It is only blocked by the furniture of your own indulgence. Move it aside, and light returns instantly. The distance between heaven and hell is often just the distance between pretending and honesty. Once you are honest with yourself, the first chains begin to fall. For deception is the rope that binds every habit of the flesh. When you finally stop calling poison pleasure, when you stop calling distraction rest, when you stop calling slavery freedom, something ancient within you begins to rise. The truth may wound at first, but it wounds to heal. The lie soothes, but it soothes to kill. That is the difference between the voice of the enemy and the whisper of grace. One flatters, the other awakens. The path back to purpose is not punishment. It is purification. Every discipline that seems like denial is in truth an act of liberation. The flesh thinks abstaining means loss, but the spirit knows it means clarity. You are not deprived when you resist temptation. You are reclaiming what was yours all along. Control, clarity, peace. The devil's kingdom is built upon one idea, that you cannot live without your cravings. The moment you prove him wrong, even once, his empire cracks. Discipline is not the death of desire. It is its resurrection. For desire was never the problem, distortion was. Desire was meant to drive you toward your divine calling, not away from it. The artist's desire to create, the lover's desire to cherish, the dreamer's desire to build, all these are holy fires when directed upward. The enemy twists them downward, convincing you that passion is sin, when in truth, passion without purpose is just energy without direction. You were meant to burn for meaning, not for escape. As you begin to withdraw from the noise, you will feel a strange silence. At first it frightens you. The mind panics without its usual distractions. You will reach instinctively for your old comforts, for the numbness that once protected you. But if you stay in the silence long enough, it becomes something sacred. You begin to hear the deeper music beneath your thoughts, the pulse of your own soul remembering how to live. The witchcraft of distraction is undone, not by noise, but by stillness. And stillness, though small, is strong enough to cast out legions. The enemy will not leave without resistance. He will whisper that you are missing out, that you are losing pleasure, that life will be dull without indulgence. But in that moment, remind yourself, pleasure without purpose was never life. it was sedation. You were not living, you were delaying. The joy that is coming is not loud or fleeting. It is quiet, deep, eternal like the sea that no storm can disturb. The devil offers sparks, God offers stars. The first dazzles, the second guides. Choose your light carefully. In time, you will notice your strength returning. The will, once atrophied by comfort, begins to stretch. You wake earlier. You breathe deeper. You speak with intention. Your eyes, once dim from distraction, begin to see again not just the world around you, but the invisible architecture of meaning within it. You begin to sense that everything is alive with purpose, that every challenge is a teacher, that every desire is a clue, pointing you back towards something sacred you've forgotten. And this is the divine irony. What you once thought was loss becomes liberation. The pleasures you gave up were never truly yours. They were the hooks that kept you from freedom. Now, in their absence, you feel lighter. You realize that the world has not become smaller. It has become clearer. Life is not less joyful. It is more honest. You begin to see how much energy was spent hiding from truth, and how peaceful it feels to simply live in alignment with it. The soul is a strange creature. It cannot be bribed with comfort, nor fooled with luxury. It knows when it is starving. And no matter how you try to distract it, it will always ache for what is real. The hunger you have carried, that restlessness that no pleasure could silence, was never a flaw. It was the voice of eternity calling you home. Pleasure tried to mimic it, but never matched it. That is why no indulgence ever satisfies, because you were built for something infinite. And when you begin to turn toward that infinity through prayer, through service, through silence, through truth, you discover a strength that feels both ancient and brand new. It is not the power of dominance, but of dominion, the quiet authority of one who has mastered himself. The enemy trembles before such people, not because they are perfect, but because they are free. He can tempt, but he cannot control them. He can lie, but he cannot persuade them. For they have learned the secret that undoes every spell, that joy and holiness are not opposites, but one and the same. You begin to understand that life was never meant to be a battle between body and spirit, but a harmony between the two. The flesh was meant to serve the soul, not silence it. The world was meant to reflect heaven, not replace it. Wealth, pleasure, ambition, all were meant to be instruments of creation, not distractions from it. It is only when they lose their order that they become idols. When you restore that order, even the smallest act becomes worship. And so the restoration continues, not through grand gestures, but through quiet victories. Each moment you choose patience over impulse, gratitude over greed, truth over convenience. These choices may seem small, but in eternity they are thunder. For every time a human being chooses purpose over pleasure, another light is lit in the darkness. And the enemy, no matter how vast his network of deception, cannot withstand the radiance of one awakened soul. And that is where freedom begins, not in the absence of temptation, but in the presence of choice. As the fog of indulgence lifts, a strange clarity descends. You begin to see that the world was never divided between sacred and secular things. It was only your perception that was fragmented. The same hands that once reached for escape can now build sanctuaries. The same mind that once plotted excuses can now shape beauty. Redemption is not the erasure of what you were, it is the redirection of it. The energy that once fueled temptation, when purified, becomes the same fire that fuels creation. The enemy fears this transformation more than your prayers, for it turns his ashes into your altar. You start to understand that moral strength is not stiffness but alignment. The righteous are not those who never fall, but those who refuse to live lying down. Strength is born when you choose what is right, even when the feeling is gone, when you act out of principle rather than impulse. The enemy thrives in emotion. God dwells in conviction. Pleasure offers fireworks. Purpose builds constellations. You have seen both, and now you know which light endures. It is in this awakening that wealth begins to change its meaning. Once it was your master, now it becomes your ministry. You begin to see that money is not the root of evil, forgetfulness is. Money is the amplifier of whatever owns your heart. In the hands of the greedy it becomes decay, in the hands of the grateful it becomes grace. The enemy once convinced you that wealth and holiness were enemies. Now you see they were always meant to be allies, united through stewardship. The problem was never gold, but worship not possession, but obsession. When you remember that everything you hold is borrowed, generosity flows like water and fear dissolves like smoke. From that generosity arises a new kind of confidence, one not built on control, but on trust. You begin to walk lighter through the world, unafraid of loss, because you have learned that nothing essential can be taken from you. The soul that gives freely is beyond theft. You could lose your house, your job, your reputation, and still not be poor. For poverty of spirit does not come from lack, but from ingratitude. The enemy cannot threaten such a person. He deals in scarcity. You live in sufficiency. He thrives on comparison. You dwell in contentment. He roars, but you have remembered silence, and silence disarms him. Discipline, once feared as a prison, reveals itself as freedom's doorway. To master yourself is not to chain joy, but to choose its direction. You begin to see that the commandments you once resisted were not fences, but guardrails, not laws to limit, but designs to preserve. They keep your joy from spilling into chaos. They keep your strength from turning into pride. The enemy called them burdens. Now you see they were blessings, carved by wisdom older than time. You are not losing pleasure. You are learning how to hold it without being consumed by it. You start to feel the divine architecture within all things. You sense it in the rhythm of work and rest, in the balance of giving and receiving, in the mysterious justice that ensures no act of kindness ever dies unnoticed. The witchcraft of the world told you that success meant accumulation. Now you see that true success means circulation. Love given, strength shared, wisdom multiplied. Even wealth obeys this law. When hoarded, it rots. When given, it grows. This is not charity. It is cosmic economy. The kingdom of heaven is built not on taking, but on tending. In this light, you rediscover the purpose of your will. It is not merely the power to choose, but the power to align. Every choice is a seed. Every thought a root. What you water with attention grows into habit, and habit becomes destiny. The enemy tried to convince you that your will was weak, but now you see it was only unfocused. The will does not gain strength through fury, but through faithfulness, by being directed toward something higher than comfort. When you choose to act, not because it feels good, but because it is good, you become indestructible. And this is where moral strength transforms into peace. For peace is not the absence of conflict, it is the mastery of response. The world around you may remain chaotic, but within you a kingdom reawakens. You realize that the enemy's greatest weapon was never temptation, but reaction, to keep you reacting so fast that you never reflect. But now you are still, and in stillness you rule. The heart trained in reflection cannot be manipulated. The man or woman who has learned to pause before speaking, to pray before judging, to breathe before surrendering to anger, that soul is a fortress. You begin to see how every act of discipline, every quiet refusal, every small obedience is a rebellion against the empire of emptiness. You are not just resisting temptation, you are rebuilding Eden within yourself. You are reminding the world that humanity was never meant to crawl in addiction, but to stand in awareness. The enemy cannot counterfeit awareness. It is the signature of the divine in man. And every moment you live with it, creation heals a little more. The joy that follows is not loud, but luminous. It does not demand attention. It radiates. You smile differently not because life is perfect, but because you have stopped demanding that it be. Gratitude begins to color your thoughts like sunrise on stone. You see beauty where once you saw boredom. You find meaning in what once felt mundane. Even the smallest task, washing a dish, walking in silence, forgiving a slight becomes a prayer. The ordinary has turned sacramental because your heart has remembered its priesthood. And perhaps that is the great reversal the enemy fears most, the day you realize you were never a slave of desire but a steward of divine energy. The day you stop fighting against your nature and start directing it toward creation. The day you understand that holiness is not repression but redirection, pleasure. Once your poison becomes your proof that joy was always meant to be holy. The enemy's thefts lose their power not because you have become invincible, but because you have become aware. From here, purpose no longer feels like duty. It feels like destiny remembered. Every breath, every moment, every choice becomes a conversation between you and the one who made you. And in that conversation, the heart finally rests. When the heart returns to truth, even the smallest things become holy. The laughter of a child, the patience of a spouse, the quiet rhythm of daily work, all are lit with meaning once lost. What was once ordinary becomes orchestral. You no longer move through life as a consumer of moments, but as a caretaker of miracles. You no longer seek blessings, you become one. This is the miracle of transformation, that a soul, once divided by indulgence, can become whole through love that serves instead of consumes. Love, when purified by purpose, ceases to be a feeling and becomes a form of sight. You begin to see others not as obstacles or opportunities, but as mirrors of the divine. You start to recognize in them the same struggle you once carried, the same longing to belong, the same battle between the eternal and the immediate. Compassion grows not from pity, but from recognition. You understand now why grace feels like gravity, because it pulls all things back to their rightful place. The enemy once taught you to use people to soothe your emptiness. Now you love them to reflect your fullness. He once convinced you that relationships were exchanges of comfort, but you have learned that they are crucibles of growth. True love is not found in pleasure, but in patience, not in perfection, but in perseverance. The world romanticizes passion. Heaven reveres endurance. To remain kind in a cruel moment, to stay faithful when convenience tempts, to forgive when memory still burns, that is love refined into power. It is the strength of the meek, the majesty of those who bow and still stand taller than kings. As this love matures, it changes how you see faith. Once, faith was theory, an idea to debate, a rule to follow, a Sunday to attend. Now, it is breath. It lives in every choice you make, every word you speak, every silence you keep. Faith is no longer what you believe about God. It is how you respond to what He has already placed within you. The enemy wanted faith to feel abstract, a concept, a comfort. But faith, in its truest form, is not comfort. It is courage. It is walking into the unknown without needing to see the ground beneath you, because you have remembered that the ground itself is held by grace. And so, your life begins to move differently. You stop chasing outcomes. You start cultivating obedience. You stop praying for signs. You start praying for strength. You stop fearing the storm, because you have learned that rain grows what sunlight cannot. The world calls you strange for this, for your peace in hardship, your calm amid uncertainty. But what they cannot see is that you no longer live from circumstance. You live from center. You no longer depend on moods. You move from meaning. You are no longer tossed by tides. You have become the lighthouse. And as your faith deepens, wealth finds its rightful place. It no longer seduces. It serves. The things you own cease to own you. You understand now that possessions are only useful when they pass through you. You begin to live by a divine arithmetic. What you give multiplies, what you hoard decays. You start to see that every blessing is both a gift and a test, not of greed, but of gratitude. Can you hold it without clutching? Can you use it without boasting? Can you lose it without despair? These are the questions that separate stewardship from idolatry. The soul that answers them truthfully will never be enslaved again. There is a strange beauty in this new simplicity. You find joy in order. You find rest in work. You find purpose in pain. You begin to understand what the ancients meant when they said that the kingdom of heaven is within you. It is not a place beyond death, but a state of being beyond distraction. It is what happens when your will and God's will finally stop arguing and start dancing. The enemy cannot follow you there, for his dominion ends where peace begins. But this peace is not passive. It is power wrapped in gentleness. It is the calm of one who knows his value cannot be auctioned by the world. You begin to walk through chaos with composure, through temptation with transparency. You have nothing to hide, nothing to prove, nothing to fear. That is freedom, not the ability to do whatever you want, but the strength to do what you should. The enemy cannot comprehend this, for his kingdom is built on confusion. But you, the awakened, live by clarity, and clarity is divine light made human. In this state, life itself becomes worship. Every meal becomes communion. Every task becomes service. Every breath becomes prayer. You realize that holiness was never meant to separate you from the world, but to teach you how to love it rightly. The holy person does not withdraw, he restores. He does not escape the world, he redeems it by presence. You do not need to preach, for your peace becomes persuasion. Your quiet integrity becomes louder than sermons. Your kindness becomes evidence of heaven. You no longer tell people about God. You remind them of Him simply by being. And that is the great mystery, that in becoming whole, you become transparent. The self that once demanded attention now becomes a window through which light passes. You cease to live for recognition because you have already been recognized by the one who made you. You cease to chase meaning because you have become meaning in motion. You cease to fear death because you have already learned how to live not by addition, but by surrender. And when you reach that place, temptation loses its glamour. The old seductions still whisper, but they sound small now, childish, almost embarrassing in their simplicity. You smile, not in pride, but in pity, because you finally see what they always were, echoes of your former blindness. You have no anger for the old self, only gratitude, for it led you to this awakening. The prodigal was necessary for the return to feel like home. Every wound was a map, every fall a lesson. Even your sin was used to reveal your need for grace. And grace, once seen, cannot be unseen. So you live now in rhythm with eternity, not running from the past, not anxious for the future, but rooted in the luminous present. You work not for reward, but from revelation. You love not to be loved, but because you are love's instrument. You wake each morning knowing that your existence itself is an answer to prayer. The enemy cannot counterfeit this joy, for it requires surrender, and he knows nothing of surrender. And perhaps this is the final secret, that heaven does not begin when you die. It begins when you stop dying every day to distraction. It begins when you reclaim your focus, your time, your conviction, your peace, and your identity, all that the enemy once stole. Heaven is not a destination. It is alignment. And when you align, even the smallest act becomes divine. The light that returns is not loud. It does not announce itself. It hums softly beneath everything, the way dawn hums beneath darkness before the sun. It finds you in the quiet hours, when the noise has finally fallen away. when you are no longer performing strength, but simply existing in grace, and you realize this is what freedom feels like. Not excitement, not power, but peace. It is the stillness of knowing that you have nothing left to hide, nothing left to chase, and nothing left to prove. It is the holy calm of being right with yourself, right with others, and right with God. You look back, and the story of your life no longer reads like a tragedy or a mistake. You see it now as an education. Every loss, a lesson. Every temptation, a teacher. Every wound, a doorway to wisdom. The enemy had meant to use your weakness as a weapon against you, but heaven has turned it into a mirror. You no longer despise your brokenness, because it was through those cracks that the light entered. You are not ashamed of your past. You are grateful for it. It taught you the anatomy of grace, that to fall and rise is not failure, but formation. And this is the revelation that changes everything. The enemy cannot steal what has been surrendered. The heart that gives itself to God becomes unthievable. The moment you release your need to control, the devil's chains dissolve. His entire empire depends on attachment. The more you cling, the more he can pull. But once you loosen your grip, once you learn to live with open hands, he has nothing left to hold. You cannot threaten the one who has already given everything away. You cannot tempt the one who has already found his treasure. The world will call this weakness. They will say you have lost your edge, your ambition, your appetite. They will not understand that you have traded hunger for harmony, that you have replaced noise with knowing. They will not see that the fire in your eyes burns quieter now, but hotter, not the fire of desire, but the fire of devotion. You do not crave anymore. You create. You do not compete anymore. You contribute. You do not consume anymore. You consecrate. Every act becomes sacred because it is done in truth. Every word carries weight because it is free of fear. This is what it means to be untouchable. Not to be immune from pain, but to be transparent to it. Pain passes through you now without poison because you no longer resist what is real. You have learned to bow before mystery instead of fighting it. You have learned that faith is not the denial of doubt, but its transformation. The very questions that once tormented you have become the roots of your compassion. You no longer need every answer because you have found the answerer. You no longer chase signs because you have learned to see God in everything. And that is the ultimate restoration, not the return of what was stolen, but the realization that you were never truly poor. The enemy cannot rob you of divine inheritance. He can only distract you from noticing it. You were never meant to live from scarcity, but from sufficiency. Everything you need to fulfill your purpose is already within you. The courage to begin, the wisdom to discern, the faith to persist, and the love to endure. These are the treasures heaven gives freely. But you must stop trading them for the cheap coins of comfort and distraction. You are no longer a beggar at the gates of pleasure. You are a builder in the kingdom of purpose. You no longer look for miracles. You live as one. You do not wait for the world to change. You become the proof that it can. Your presence becomes restoration. Your stillness becomes strength. Your words become seeds of awakening. The enemy once whispered that you were powerless, and yet here you stand, clothed in the quiet majesty of one who has remembered his origin. You have discovered that divinity was never something to reach for. It was something to release. So live now as one who is fully awake. Guard your time as if it were gold, for it is. Guard your focus as if it were faith, for it is. Guard your peace as if it were paradise, for it is. You no longer need to fear the enemy, for he has lost the only thing that ever gave him power, your attention. You are no longer his student. You are his contradiction. Where he preaches indulgence, you practice intention. Where he offers illusion, you embody truth. Where he sows fear, you plant faith. And where he whispers death, you sing life. And perhaps the greatest miracle of all is this: you will fall again, and it will not undo you. You will stumble, and still you will rise wiser. You will face temptation, and instead of shame, you will feel compassion for your own humanity. For grace does not end when you fail, it begins when you do. The enemy will return with old tricks and familiar voices, but this time you will see them for what they are, shadows cast by a light that has already claimed you. You will smile, not in arrogance, but in understanding, because the battle is no longer between you and him. It is between illusion and awareness has already won. Now, you walk through the world differently. You look upon the crowds chasing what you once chased and feel no superiority, only sorrow and love. You see yourself in them, the old you, lost in the shimmer of temporary things, and your heart burns with compassion instead of judgment. You realize that salvation was never about escape. It was about return. Return to presence. Return to purpose. Return to the divine design that beats beneath all things. You do not leave the world to find heaven. You reveal heaven within the world. And so your story ends where it began, not with a warning, but with a choice. The same choice you had at the beginning of time, to live as a creature of craving or as a vessel of creation. The enemy still prowls, not in the shadows, but in the comfort, not in the chaos, but in the compromise. But you have seen through him now. You have tasted truth. And once truth is tasted, illusion becomes bitter. You cannot unsee what you now know, that every temptation is a trade, every indulgence an exchange, every distraction a theft. But you have learned to guard what matters most, the temple of your soul. And when you do, the enemy flees, because he cannot dwell where light is lived, not just believed. And that is where this sermon ends, not in triumph, but in transfiguration. The same hands that once reached for escape now build altars. The same lips that once lied now bless. The same heart that once wandered now worships without words. You have not escaped the world. You have illuminated it. You are no longer fighting the darkness. You have become the dawn. And in that still, radiant silence where the battle ends, the voice of truth speaks one final time. You were never meant to be entertained by the world. You were meant to enlighten it. And the light within you, the one the enemy tried to steal, shines again, unbreakable, eternal, alive.